Last week, the state of Texas, and particularly the city of Houston, were hit with a storm system of epic proportions, an ice storm that left millions without power, without running water, without clean water, without electricity. The damage is still being calculated, but we know it's in the billions. And I'm here today with Brandon Schwertner, who is on the ground in Houston to really get a feel for what happened. So Brandon, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brandon, what happened last week?
Yes, so thanks for doing this. It's not the typical interview that we would probably like to be talking about, but I'll have to say that the first thing is, my state of mind walking in here today is I'm super sad. I'm angry. I'm confused. Personally, in business, questions are flying all over the place. Seems like people are, starting to point the finger. And the media shows us that. And there's always the underlying story of what happened. And yes, there's a story around what went wrong and who's to blame and what should have been done to make this outcome not happen. But what I'm also seeing is I don't know a single person that hasn't been financially impacted by this storm. And even during a pandemic, there may still be maybe 20-30% of my friends that don't know anyone that's had COVID. So it's impacted everyone that I'm aware of, and I'm not even at the brunt of the storm. I'm in the Houston area. As you move north and west, it was worse. There was more ice, more outages. Yes, there was loss of life. It was mentioned in the news recently that there was an 11-year-old boy that lost his life to hypothermia, which is just gut-wrenching. And I'm sure there are more. So when we think about, you not only lose electricity, a lot of people were without water, and people were boiling water. If they had gas to boil, some people have electric heat, so how do you boil water? You have to build a fire in the middle of an ice storm. I mean, there are people that had water damage in their homes, countless. It's gonna be a battle with insurance companies because was it related to the storm? Or was it related to the instruction from ERCOT or the PUC to shut the power grid off? And that'll be, who knows how that plays out. There are farmers that lost all their crops. There are low-income housing districts that live on well water. The well froze up. The only way to fix that is to dig a new well. That's $10,000 per well. Who's going to pay for this? Restaurants had to throw away food. There's no insurance claim. I've already heard that from restaurant owners. So it's systemic. It's impacting everyone. And I'm afraid at the end of the day, the consumers are going to end up paying for this today, tomorrow, for the next 10 years. I think the aggregate impact of this for the state may be worse than the California power crisis, which took California 20 years to recover from. So as a born and raised Texan with a lot of pride for my state, I'm heart-wrenched with what's going on.
Walk me through what happened starting Sunday night. So, as most people know, Houston is a pretty temperate place to be in the winter, mild temperatures. So Sunday night, the weather starts to change. Please take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, a normal winter day in Houston is a beautiful day in New York City, right? Maybe you wake up, it's 45, 50 degrees, and it's high 60s in the afternoon. It's the most pleasant time to live in Texas, is the winter. If we go back even before that, if we take the week prior to the weather event, which really started to come in that Sunday, which was Valentine's Day of all days. What ERCOT does, which ERCOT is, they're not in charge of who makes money, right? They're just the intermediary that their job is reliability and keep the lights on and let the market operate the way the market's supposed to be, and the financial fallout will just happen. That's the market design. They plan for worst case. And that worst case was underestimated by about 12%. Now, that doesn't seem like a big miss for a worst case. You'd think that surely with the government involvement, there would be more cushion. The problem came down that the storm path, as it came down the central U.S., really sat on a lot of the gas pipeline infrastructure. And our infrastructure in that area is very different than what you would see in Chicago or where it's a lot colder. it's winterized and it can withstand that type of temperature. Ours do not. And there's a debate on why are they not. And we had this happen in 2011. Why wasn't there action? You'll read a lot about that. But the issue was, let's say in an 80,000 megawatt system, just as a rough estimate, we lost 26,000 megawatts of natural gas generation between Sunday evening and Monday morning. And we also lost an additional 4,000 megawatts of wind because the wind turbines and the hubs, they froze, they wouldn't spin. So if you think about losing 30,000 megawatts out of an 80,000 megawatts, so that's huge. There's no other resource to go turn on. There's no price elasticity anymore. It's just a broken market at that point. So what happened, ERCOT went through all of their, call it their armor from an event like this, and they had nothing else to do but to knock load out. And so by going into Monday, there were roughly 4 million people without power, some of them without water. Water became an issue as we moved through the week because the storm got worse. So water lines were freezing, water treatment plants were exploding, there were boil notices in a lot of places. And it became an issue for hospitals. City of Galveston couldn't get water over to the island. So it was material, both on a power and water basis. So a lot of people without power, without water. It's pretty much as bad as it gets. Now back to your question on how is this relative to a normal Houston winter? The real feel at my house when I walked outside with no power Monday morning was 1 degree.
Wow.
And I think the absolute temperature was 11 in my backyard. So I've lived in the Houston area for 20 years with a short stint in New York, and I've never seen anything even close to that. What it did to just the foliage around where I live, which is there's a lot of tall trees and things like the plants couldn't even survive this type of event. We did lose power. In my house, thankfully, we were only out for about 20 hours. And then it came to we have power and the kids have no school and there's snow outside in Houston, so it's happy. The kids were happy for a little while. But then it came to the event of, we saw this in 2011, elderly people in low-income districts, they will die without power and heat. There were pictures of inside water faucets, inside homes frozen dripping water. One of my close workers from work that lives by herself with a cat was cuddled up in 4 blankets and breathing, cold air because her house is not insulated like you would find a house in New Jersey or New York City. So everything was systemic. Conservation, it's not known to the common person or common business owner. Conservation relates to electricity, right? You just walk in, you turn the switch on, it's always there. The utility sends you a bill. It's simple, right? It's almost a luxury item until you don't have it. And I like to say, you don't leave your car running in the driveway overnight. Why? Because you know that you have a fixed amount of fuel in the tank. You won't drive that car in the summer to a summer vacation to a park if gas is $10 a gallon. And let me give you just an analogy to give you an idea of why the cost of power is in the tens of billions. I relate it to if you normally pay $5 for a roll of toilet paper at your neighborhood grocery store and you have a Cat 5 hurricane hit and you go into your neighborhood grocery store and you find that same roll of toilet paper costs $58,000. That's the magnitude of the price move that happened that's killing cities, killing individuals at the home on their electric bill. And you'd think for an extra $34 billion of expense that the consumer would have better service, whereas they suffered all week. So who's to blame there? That's not for me to decide, but it was obviously a broken market, and markets don't work when price elasticity breaks.
So Houston is known as the energy capital of America. Certainly in my mind, it's known as the energy capital of America. So it's stunning that this would happen in, of all places, Houston. The number one employer, to my knowledge, in the greater Houston area is the energy sector But before we even go there, Houstonians are also, in my experience and in everyone's experience, warm, loving, caring people. So let's talk about some of the stories of uplifting events that occurred over this last week, of generosity, of camaraderie, of helping out, of helping one's fellow citizen.
Yeah, there's a lot of it. And I like to think that I call it my people. I grew up in the state, and when there's a need, you go do it at any cost. And that's, I think that's a common theme with most Texans, and most people that have moved to Texas have that same character as well. Whether it be church groups or neighborhoods or whatever, people were helping fix pipes that had spare parts. There were lines at the local Home Depot waiting to get in at the open for plumbing material that were 200, 300, 400 on Saturday morning, people deep 30 minutes before the open to get into Home Depot, where they had to block off aisles and ration. You only get 8 foot of one piece of conduit to do the repairs. So there was also, you could want to help, but there was also a supply chain problem. I know of groups that drove trucks, tens of thousands of dollars of equipment that drove from California into Texas that were administered by nonprofits. I'll also say one of the stories that hit me hardest towards the end of the week, we were coming out of it on Friday. We had just buried my wife's grandmother on Friday. It was very, tough, emotional week for all of us. Any of us had much sleep, and we did knock off 90% of our consumption and played a lot of board games with the kids, but they were getting a little restless. So it was a tough week for everyone. And as I sent a note out to our company to check on everyone and to see is anyone have a need that some neighbor can address, I was notified by our principal engineers that, hey, Brandon, we still have people in the field that are using pear burners to melt ice on equipment. And we were doing that all week by orders of the governor. We work with gas processing plants and trying to get water to them so they can get gas online, so we get fuel to the plants. And our workers were in the field. And the story I mentioned was a gentleman who, at his house, his wife and kids, they didn't have power. Still didn't have power. And it was just a small home in West Texas. And the wife said, honey, you can help a lot more people out in the field than you can us, go do your thing. And they were working all night in the dark at negative freezing temperatures to try to help without getting incremental pay or anything else. It was just the right thing to do. I wish there were more of those stories in the media. There's thousands of them that I don't know about.
And I've heard so many of them too over the past few weeks. Number of people who just volunteered their time to help fix problems that they weren't even experts in fixing, just to be able to help their neighbors, just to be able to help others' loved ones, just to be able to help the state move forward. And doing it without complaining and without any malice, just moving forward and helping everyone move forward. Where does Texas go from here? Where does Houston go from here? Because now, as you said, as we're coming out of it, you're hearing stories that are equally troubling of consumers getting bills for $18,000, $20,000, bills that are just astronomical, right? My average electric bill is $300 in the winter, and I live in the Northeast, maybe $400. So I can't even fathom seeing an $18,000 bill in my mailbox, and it's happening to thousands of people.
So where do we go from here? That is the big question, and it's a general question, but let me try to go from segment to segment. Consumers can't pay that bill. By the way, we're in a pandemic. So when Galveston couldn't get water, they were thinking about evacuating the hospital to another hospital. Well, where are you going to find that many beds in the middle of a pandemic? So we were faced with questions that demanded answers that we never contemplated that we'd have to ask. Whether you were the utility or wherever you were, we were all asking these same questions. I know not only on the power side, it's on the gas side too. So even fortunate people that have generators at their home, well, they haven't yet received the gas bill, which gas went from $2 in MCF up to, in some cases, over $1,000 in MCF. That right now I know they're potential defaults for cities, municipals, and co-ops that are regulated entities that don't have the capital to pay for the fuel that they had to buy to service their load at any cost. So where do we go from here? You can't bill someone 10, 20, 100 times what they're used to paying for energy. They can't pay it. Whether they want to or not, they can't pay it. I know there are discussions with the state on potential packages of how do we amortize this cost out. I know for an average gas company to amortize the cost of gas, could be 20 times what that company usually makes in a year. And so how do they go get the working capital to float and amortize it? At the end of the day, it seems like everything points back that the consumer will ultimately pay, and they seem to always pay. It just might not be now, but it may be over the long run. And I think if I had to look at the state as a whole over the last really 15 years, and from a political positioning standpoint, I think we've fooled customers a little bit. We have been the leading renewable state by production. Not saying that renewables were the problem here. There was a lot of things that went wrong. But what that did is it drove energy prices down, where we also have the lowest energy prices in the United States. And that's invited a lot of businesses to come, especially ones that are very energy intensive on the input side. So, how does that get solved? I don't know. But energy prices, they're going to go up as a result. Is it fair for consumers, whether they were misled over the last 15 years or not, on what the ultimate cost of the effect of what was going on the electric grid will be? I just don't know. The gap is so big right now, and I don't think the state, without help, even with a surplus, can fund its way out of this without federal help. Or a significant third party.
What can the industry do to prevent this again? Because it seems that once-in-a-lifetime storms are happening more often and in more places than once in a lifetime.
Yeah, you definitely can't argue against climate change anymore. I mean, my wife and I were talking just the other day of, what is the next boot that's going to be thrown at the common citizen? It's been a rocky and wild and unpredictable last 18 months across the board. And I think we're just hoping for the best going forward, which I always say hope is not a good strategy, but it may be what we're left with. So what happens from here? Winterization of pipelines, it's going to happen, right? And that's going to come at a significant expense. Who pays for that? I don't know. But that's going to have to happen. We're seeing extreme weather events, and with climate change, it's both hotter summers and it's crazier winters. It's on both, and some people don't fully recognize that when they think of global warming. It's only just warming, but it means more erratic weather behavior on both sides. The other big winner, Houston's the energy capital of the world, but you think of that as oil and gas, and that's what it's been historically. You don't think about it for electricity. So now we have the convergence of meeting sustainability goals for corporates, for investment, for raising capital and funds, and that's a good thing. And we've seen the decline in cost of renewables come down to a level where it's not a premium product anymore. I think from a consumer standpoint, you will have a push for more independence, for the fact that you're telling me it costs the system $34 billion more than last year through February, and I didn't even have power at my house. I thought I would get better service, for that amount of money. People will be aggravated, businesses will be aggravated. They will rethink plans behind the meter. And what that means is self-sustaining, more than likely some element of renewable power, maybe coupled with a thermal unit that they own behind the meter, and they will reduce their reliance on the grid. I think the third wave you will see is more, we need to think of electricity like we do any other fuel. The price of oil sets the gallon of gas that goes in your car, and it affects driving when oil's $100 versus $20. So there are ways to make electricity consumption economic, where we think, now we can't go educate everyone at the consumer level on how they should economically utilize power. The light bulb or this camera over here that's on, does it know what the price of power is right now in this market, which is actually every 5 minutes of every day? You can't educate people. That's not their responsibility. But what we can do is look to businesses to say, whatever you do in your business, at some point, at some price of power, it won't make sense anymore for you to conduct your business. And if you have that flexibility, I'm not talking about an ER at a hospital, but maybe it's a data storage company, or it's a semiconductor factory, or an art furnace, or something of that sort, that can think about the way they buy electricity differently, where I'm not only going to buy electricity differently, I'm also going to put telemetry, which actually this could be a subsidized consideration by the state of Texas, to say on every commercial meter, we're going to have telemetry, and you as a business owner will buy a block of power, and then at some price, I'm not going to consume, and I'm going to export that power back to the grid because the grid needs it more than I do, driven by the fact that as a business, that becomes a new revenue stream where it makes more sense to sell my fuel to someone else that needs it than to conduct my operations. Now, is that wrong or bad? Absolutely not, when you think about the aggregate effect would have prevented the outages that we saw. You saw the video of the city of Houston lights on Monday night. What was that all about? I have no idea. Was that picture really taken that night? It kind of looked like it did, because everything was black on the fringes, and I live on the fringes and we didn't have power. So things like that. Why were the lights on? I'm not pointing fingers, but I'm just saying, I think we have to rethink as a state, and actually as a country, how we're consuming power relative to other commodities.
So Brandon, you work with kids all over the world, and that's something that most people probably don't know. How does what just happened, this event, affect someone who's 20?
Yeah. That's a great question. You know, and you live in the Northeast, so I think you've seen this effect when you see a run on the grocery store when there's a snowstorm, or, you know, Houston, a hurricane, much less a snowstorm for us. And that's, I remember dropping my wife off because we thought we were going to be on a boil notice so we could go get a case of water for the house. And, you know, we just had a couple of lights on, and we were playing board games with the kids, and that lasted almost a week. So we wanted to go get some water. And when I saw people just running out and what was in their baskets, and that, even in the state of Texas with all the good, it kind of made me mad of, why do you need 4 gallons of milk we're just trying to get to Saturday, right? And you see some of those things, and I started thinking about, and you're right, I love working with kids, and they're young adults, you know, from 18 to 30 around the world, through the YPO organization. And I love perspective outside of the U.S. on the problems that they deal with. And by the way, the magnitude of the events over the last 18 months, if I think about my good friend Ahmad that lives in Beirut, he was 2 blocks away from the explosion that happened. I mean, there's craziness all over the world right now. But when I think about the 20-year-olds, I hope that they've taken to sustainability more than, say, my peer group at my age, and certainly my parents' age, which is great. But back to the economic consumption of power, I have to ask the question, like, how many kids that were 20 to 30 were charging their cell phone, posting pictures of what was going on in their life, which is, in aggregate, is a heavy consumption load that could have been used by someone else. I don't know the answer to that, but I think those are some of the questions that we're just gonna have to talk about and discuss. And were they in the wrong by charging their cell phone in the middle of a disaster? Absolutely not, right? I mean, I think that is the responsibility of government and the market construct and the way we think about electricity as a commodity. And I feel like the market is designed for 20 years down the road where we are economically consuming power, and we're just not. But I have a lot of hope for that age group. They're amazing kids. I think that they get stuff that makes a lot of sense, and they're not afraid to talk about it. So if there's anyone that can really change consumer behavior, it would be that peer group, as it relates to to these types of events.
Are you seeing that right now with young adults in Texas after this week? After these 2 weeks?
Not yet. I mean, I'm sitting here. I'm assumed to be an electricity expert. I have thousands of questions that will come out over time and how this plays out, much less passing that knowledge on to younger people on how they should think about electricity. If it was any other commodity, they'd get it. If a hurricane's coming to Houston, we have traffic lanes where all traffic goes out of the city, and people know that they're sensitive to, I should fill my car up 4 or 5 days before, and I should leave it full so if it takes me 6 hours to get out of the city, I can get out of the city and I'm not stranded. But you don't see people run on the gas stations filling up big truckloads full of gas. So with other commodities, again, we think that way already. It just comes back to electricity, just kind of this mysterious thing that you just flip the lights on and the AC's on, and even for a gas stove, you've got a pilot light, right? If your electricity goes out and you're trying to turn the stove on, now I'm thinking about, what about the homes that don't know that you actually have to light a match to light, because you have a pilot on your fancy little machine, and now you've got emissions flowing through your house.
That would be me. That would be where I sit on the spectrum.
Yeah,
in terms
I just don't think that's the consumer's fault in all of this. I don't.
And that leads me to another question that I have. You're also the CEO of a power organization, a power company, a big one. What transpired starting, let's say, Sunday, Valentine's Day? So the cold comes in. What's happening in the industry on the ground, in your company, with your peers?
Yeah, a lot of communication, which I was grateful for, and a lot of leaders are sending notes around, and with the financial fallout coming, just grateful for the over-communication. In some context, competitors at the highest level, the largest publicly traded companies, were phenomenal in communicating and really saw this coming, more so than the PUC and ERCOT did as well. I was actually one through the weekend. I have a trading background too, and I feel in these waves, sometimes things do get overblown, and then reality sets in and it's not quite as bad. This one just progressively got worse all the way through, and I was wrong on the severity of it. With our company, just chaos. Questions from customers. It gets into a lot of hairy detail on how the market works. There was also really a disjointed environment between the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT that made our life even more confusing. And to give you an example of that, you had Governor Abbott, which I thought did a great thing of trying to keep the fuel inside the state, because we were suffering the worst, because we just didn't have the infrastructure to keep the lights on. And when that happened, well, there may have been gas processing plants that were responsible for getting fuel to those plants that were under a mandatory curtailment by the system. And so now you have contradictory messaging between ERCOT and the governor. And so I saw, even on the ground, orders to come up, go back down, come up, go back down, call the PUC. The governor says this, they're telling me this, what do you think? They're issuing waivers, they overrule, and it was just chaotic.
What was the most touching story you either experienced or heard about during this last 2 weeks?
Yeah, I have smart metering at my house, and this is a little selfish, but in the age of digital communication, and I have an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old and a 9th grader, 14-year-old, and the older two have phones, and if school's out, whether it's video games or television or interlude with playing outside, I mean, that's their everyday life. And it's a luxury, and it's routine for a lot of kids. But when we got power back on, there was a movement towards, let's fire everything back up and charge everything, and life is back to normal. But knowing what I know, having been in this industry for 20 years and having seen the freeze off that happened in 2011, I know that there was loss of life associated with that. So we sat down as a family, and we reduced our consumption somewhere throughout the week. It was in the initial point, it was about 90%, but I started to damage equipment outside my house, and then it was, well, who cares if the pool blows up or whatever? But the message to the kid was, life is at risk here. And if we're charging an iPad or you're playing a video game, there might be indirectly loss of life associated with that. And their receptiveness to that story, my little girl ran through the house and she started not only shutting things off, which most were already shut off, but I also taught them that circuitry in a house, even if the things are off, has native load, right? So you have to go unplug everything. And we went in the garage and I showed them the breaker box. I'm like, what do we need? We just need kitchen lights and we need gas. We had gas heat, thank goodness that we could keep the house warm. And we've shut every other breaker off. And so I hope that back to young people, that they'll learn from this. But then, tops everything was just a gentleman that works for us in the field that grew up in West Texas and doesn't say a whole lot and likes to has some interesting Texas-based hobbies, I'll just say that, but just salt of the earth. And for him, with no hesitation, to be sitting in a parking lot waiting to be dispatched to longitude, latitude lines to go help, regardless of his family and kids at home that have no power. It doesn't get any better than that. And I know that he's not the only one, there are thousands more. And that's modeled by the neighborly approach of people trying to help people at a sacrifice to their loved ones or helping people out financially. Companies are starting to do that, whatever it may be. The right thing to do is to be humble, to not try to take the last penny off the table, to search for a collective reasoning for this so that we find a solution. But I think humble, modest, over-communicating, working together with what historically may have been competitors or foes or whatever it may be. And even the media is always going to do a good job of stirring the pot. We don't have to do that, right? They're paid to do that, and they're fiduciaries of their money, and they know that emotional articles that may strike debate are more valuable. We know that statistically. But we as consumers, we're the ones in charge of behavioral change of what we listen to and don't listen to. So we could get involved in that, of pointing the finger and the blame of what happened. But I think that what we want to model is, let's not point the finger or ask why in the world did this happen or who's at fault. I think we just need to understand everyone's perspective. Like the old days, before the advent of the cell phone, there was actually a conversation, and doesn't mean that, hey, Matt, you like one football team and I like another one and we'll never agree on that. But at least we would have a conversation so I could say, Matt, thank you, I understand your point of view. Don't agree with you, but I understand. And I think, maybe what's happened, whether it was the contested election or the pandemic or what happened in Beirut with the explosion, the list goes on, that maybe we're just to react, we're supposed to listen and stop talking and ask questions so that we can work together to find a collective solution, whether that's in business or within your own community.
What's fascinating and amazing to me is, along with the gut-wrenching stories and the stories that just pull on everyone's heartstrings, there are those amazing stories of generosity and sharing and cooperation that are coming out of this, and that's beautiful. And that's something that I think we can all take something very, very valuable away from and carry forward. And I want to thank you, Brandon, for sharing this time with me and talking about what happened in the middle of it. I still remember my text to you on Sunday, which I now feel very badly about, when I said, do you guys even have snow plows down in Houston? And you texted back, and I don't think you remember, and you said, snow plows, ? Because you had been up for 48 hours straight at that point in time. Yeah. And everything had been iced over. It's really heartwarming to see the way the community came together in all of Texas, and certainly in the greater Houston community, the way people have supported each other, the way people have helped each other, and the way people are working together to try to, as you said, solve these problems now, rather than pointing fingers. Because right now it's really just ensuring that everyone has electricity, everyone has safe, clean drinking water, and everyone has affordable energy. But I want to thank you so much for this opportunity.
Sure. Yeah,
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. while the immediate crisis has passed, there is still a tremendous amount of need on the ground in Texas and in the greater Houston area. I'd encourage everyone to see how you can help and see how we can all collectively help to help improve this situation in South Texas for all of the wonderful residents in the greater Houston community. Thank you.